Hi everyone, welcome back to my Diablo Immortal video. In this video I wanted to share my Necromancer Crowd Control build that I use when raiding the vault as a shadow. So at the moment we're shadows and been shadows for quite a long time, and this build works nicely. I find it really fun to use, so I thought I'd share it with anyone else who wants to try it out or needs a build to go into vault with, and then you can sort of tweak it from there. So for those who don't know, raiding the vault is something that happens between the immortals and the shadows. There's 4 stages of the vault, there's 4 floors. When you get to floor 4, it's basically head to head between your immortals and shadows. So it's 4 versus 4, and basically the immortals are trying to defend the vault and the loot that are stored there, and the shadows are trying to raid the vault and try and take the essentia and the relics and equipment that are stored there. So if the shadows win, they get to open all of the chests on floor 4 and then grab all of the loot. If the immortals win, then the shadows don't get the loot on that floor and they've successfully defended. So that's basically what raiding the vault is. It's available Monday to Saturdays, 12 PM to 1 PM and 7 PM to 8 PM server time. And yeah, that's basically what the vault is. For those of you who don't know what it is, so just tuning into this video, wanted to find out a bit more about it. But for those who are quite familiar with vaults, yeah, there's obviously lots of builds that you can go in with. A very PvP, damage heavy or crowd control support build. I prefer this crowd control one as a necromancer, so let's share it now. So if we go to our skills, these are the skills that I like to go in with. So for the first one, for the primary attack, I like to go in with Soulfire, and you'll see why a bit later on. And then for the other skills, I like to go in with the Borrowed Time buff. I like to go in with the Wraith Form buff and control skill. I like to go in with Bone Wall as a sort of a summon control skill for damage and crowd control. This is a nice one which I'll talk about a bit later on. And then Bone Spikes for the damage, and got some additional effects as well. So they're the skills: Borrowed Time, Wraith Form, Bone Wall, Bone Spikes and Soulfire. Now let's take a look at the essences.
I have much to show you.
So let's start with the headpiece. So for the helm, I like to go in with Hideous Dawning, which is Rupturing Spikes essence. So this causes enemies to bleed for additional damage and no longer charges up. So I don't have that charge up. I can basically throw that 3 times really quickly against the enemies. It'll damage them and it'll cause them to bleed for additional continuous damage. So I also get an increased 18% damage, and then the cooldown is down by 10% as well. So I've got all of the slots awakened, so I get the awakened bonuses. This was a really nice one that worked with Bone Spikes, because obviously once you hit your enemy and they're trying to run away, they've got bleed on them, so their health's going down a little bit more, which is putting them under pressure as well, and then helps for the other party members to sort of take out the remaining health if you can't. So that's the helm. For the chest piece, I like to go in with Corpse Pillar. So this is where Bone Wall can now be sort of changed into rotting pillars instead of actual wall that you summon. So they're pillars which come from the ground, and basically if you cast that under an opponent, they'll get thrown into the air. It's really annoying, and yeah, it'll knock them away, damage them, and it'll also slow down all nearby enemies. So it does quite a lot, and it's one of the most annoying necromancer skills that you can come up against. I'm sure if some of you have had a necromancer throw this on you, it is really annoying. So I like to use this one in the vault because there's quite a small area where you're fighting as well. So it's quite nice to just sort of throw this against a group of enemies, and you'll see them sort of go in the air. It's quite fun. I get an increased 18% damage and 10% decreased cooldown. So that's the chest piece. Now for the shoulder, I've gone in with this essence where your Bone Spikes now knocks enemies away. This effect can only occur once every 5 seconds to an enemy player. I get an additional 3.6% cooldown, and the damage is increased by 10%. So as the Bone Spikes is doing the damage and the bleed, I've also knocked them away, just increasing that distance between yourself and the enemy, so you can sort of, you know, keep your distance and then throw some more attacks at them. So you can also change this for the essence where Bone Spikes increases its range as well, which is this one, Chasm Crosser. But I prefer to stick with the knockback just because it feels a bit more effective in the vault. So that's the shoulder piece. For the leg piece, I go in with Proximal Fear. So this is one that pairs with Wraith Form, where you're basically a Banshee, where the Wraith Form now causes enemies who touch to go in fear, basically. So all the enemies you touch, they flee in fear if your potency is high enough, of course, and it damages them. So this works well if you have got those secondary gems high enough, so your potency is at a decent level. And when I do Wraith form to get out the way, I like to sort of go into certain enemies as I'm going out the way. And if I do manage to get this kick in, you'll see the fear effect on that enemy, and you also get the damage as well. So I get the 18% damage and another 10% damage. So yeah, Wraith form now causes enemies you touch to flee in fear and damages them. It's a really nice one to have. So for the main hand weapon, I like to go in with Revenant Wind. So this is where Wraith form now calls for spirits to haunt up to 3 nearby enemies, dealing 7,914 damage over 3 seconds, while reducing their movement speed by 30%. So we've already got the movement speed decrease with Corpse Pillar, and then we've also got the bleed damage with the spikes, and then we've got some additional movement speed decrease with this essence as well. So the enemy's under quite a lot of pressure. There's quite a lot happening to them here, and they get the damage over time here with the 3,900 damage over 3 seconds. You get an additional 90% damage with Wraith form, and the Wraith form cooldown is reduced by 10%. So this is really cool. And on the topic of Wraith form cooldown, I like to pair this up with this essence here, Stroke of Midnight, for the offhand weapon essence. So this is where Wraith form cooldown is reduced by 0.5 seconds each time you're hit. Cooldown cannot be reduced by more than 1.5 seconds maximum. Wraith form cooldown reduced by 3.6%, and I get an additional 10% cooldown. So loads of cooldown on that Wraith form, as much as we can get. So if you are under pressure and hit, sometimes you will get struck by a loss of control by an enemy, and basically as soon as that loss of control goes away and you're in control of your character, you want to be able to Wraith form straight out the way. So you want that cooldown to be up so you can grab some healing potions, or you can get far enough away to deal damage, or even resurrect one of your party members. So I like to have this this essence here. With the shield, I like to go in with Pyre's Allure. Now this is where Bone Wall can now be ignited with Soulfire, dealing 4,790 damage per second to nearby enemies. Damage is increased by another 90%, and the cooldown of Bone Wall is decreased by 10%. So obviously this is the one that works in perfectly with the Corpse Pillar. So as soon as you cast Corpse Pillar with the Bone Wall, straight away you want to use Soulfire to do your primary attack. So the Bone Wall is ignited, and you will see the sort of effect on the floor, and this is where you'll get the damage per second to any nearby enemies. So this is great when you're casting this when say if you're on the balcony and the enemies are approaching the balcony, or if you're in the boss room and the enemies are coming up the stairs. I like to cast the Bone Wall in the entrance area, make it go light, and then sort of move back away, and then cast the rest of them when the enemies come close. So yeah, definitely going with this one. And Spiked Fetor, that's how you pronounce it, I think. So this is where Soulfire now has a 25% chance to explode on hit, dealing damage to nearby enemies and causing them to burn. Soulfire damage increased to 9%, and Soulfire damage increased by 10%. So this one seems like a no-brainer, because I have got Soulfire equipped to cast onto Bone Wall to basically trigger Pyre's Allure. And once I've done that, when I am using Soulfire to attack normal enemies that just come into the the vault, then I've got that 25% chance to explode. And also I get that burn damage. So I've got the continuous burn damage from Soulfire. I've got the continuous bleed damage from spikes, and then you've got the slowdown as well, and then you've also knocked them in the air. So there's a lot going on. It's a really annoying setup. So if you did want to go in with Bone Spear, then you could swap out the Wraith form cooldown essence, and you can equip this one here, where basically Blightmore. Bone Spear also poisons enemies hit for 14,000 damage over 3 seconds. So there's your continuous damage effect with Bone Spear, if you did want to go in with Bone Spear. But then obviously you're losing out on Bone Spear can now be ignited with Soulfire and the Soulfire essence here. You'll have to swap them out for something else. For example, if you want to go in with Dark Curse instead, then you'd need to swap out potentially the chest piece and the legs with an essence, which works well with Dark Curse. But then you're mixing up this build too much, sort of thing. This kind of works for me. So, you've got the bone spikes now causing enemies to bleed and no longer charging up. You've got the corpse pillar that throws the enemies into the air and then slows them down as well. You've got the fear from the wraith form and some increased damage. You've got the bone spikes knocking enemies away. You've got the wraith form cooldown and also dealing continuous damage with the haunting. And then you've got your shield lighting up soulfire for continuous damage to any enemies who get trapped in that the bone wall. And then soulfire now can do the burn damage as well, and 25% chance to explode on hit, and doing that burn damage. 25% doesn't seem like a lot, but if you're hitting an enemy 5-6 times, hopefully you're going to get it trigger at least once and do the burn damage with the bleed effect as well. So they're the essences. If we have a look at the set items, I like to go in with 4 Piece of Grace. So I get all continual damage, channel damage, and persistent ground damage increased by 15%. And each time you do damage to an enemy 5 times, you get an additional 18,000 damage dealt to that enemy. So that's 4 Pieces of Grace. And then I've only recently switched to actually 4 Pieces of Angment to try it out to see how effective it is. Because I know a lot of people talk about this set item set. So I'm trying it out at the moment. So the duration of your additional ignite state is increased by 30%. And then there's a 15% chance of attaching that ignite status to an enemy when dealing damage with primary attacks or skills, dealing 22,000 damage over 3 seconds up to a maximum of 3. So you get the ignite continuous damage on the enemy, you get the burn damage, you get the bleed damage as well. So that's a lot of continual damage, which works nicely with I wanted to show Pain Clasp as well. So increased damage dealt by 24% to enemies suffering from a continuous damage effect. When an enemy suffering from a continuous damage is within 10 yards, your movement speed is increased by 6%. So it works nicely if you do have Pain Clasp as well. So they're my set items. And I don't really like to talk about legendary gems too much because not everyone's going to have the same legendary gems, and some of these are really hard to get. But just to show what I do have, I mean, at the moment, I'm going in with Rolling Consequence for the critical hit increase. I'm going in with Blood-Soaked Jade. I think everyone should be going, trying to get Blood-Soaked Jade into their character build. Phoenix Ashes is kind of for survivability. I feel squishy sometimes as a Necromancer, and I like to have this as my sort of survivability gem. Chip of Stone Flesh works nicely with complete loss of control when I've got fear. Obviously, it means you do need to have high potency to actually increase the complete loss of control. But if it does work out nicely, it's very effective with the explosion. Gloomcast to improve my primary attacks. Starfire is a no-brainer. This is effective everywhere in the game, just raining down those meteors on enemies. I've already spoken about Pain Clasp. So Pain Clasp and the next gem are the only 2-star legendary gems that I'm still going in with. Now, Pain Clasp works in nicely with Mother's Lament, so they pair together quite well. So when you deal damage, you have 20% chance of gaining Maternal Disdain, which increases your critical hit chance by 32% for 6 seconds. And then when it ends, you get that blood spike towards the enemies, dealing 54% base damage to enemies. It hits and causes them to bleed. So there's your additional bleed damage as well. So you got bleed from Mother's Lament, which works with Pain Clasp. You got the bleed from your spikes, and then you've got your burn from your Soulfire, and then you've got your haunting from your Wraith form. So that's how I've kind of made this build up and sort of paired everything together, and personally it works nicely for me. Once again, this is just a build which works for me. It might not work for you, but this is sort of a starting point where you can sort of take this CC build and then tweak it to your liking. Add what works for you, and then sort of remove what doesn't work for you. But give it a try. It also works really well in Battleground as well. So the borrowed time is basically when you do get killed in floor 4, you can get back up again, and as soon as you get back up, ray form out the way, collect some healing potions, get out the way of enemies, and then go in for the kill again. And also you might be able to resurrect one of your team members if they're down. So yeah, basically it's just firing down the spikes, getting the bone wall up, getting the bone walls ignited, moving away with ray form, soul fire again, get the spikes back. You get the drill. Just basically spamming these crowd control skills on the enemy whilst you're doing the primary attack damage, and you want to move out the way with ray form. You kind of want to save the ray form for when you do get struck with complete loss of control. So when your character can't move at all, that's where you need your ray form to get out the way when you have full control of your character again. Or if you die, borrowed time will bring you back up again, and then get out the way, get that distance away. Looks like Vault's started now, so I might give it a go, but I will let 2 floor 4 fights play out at the end of this video, just so you can see this in action as well from Vaults I did earlier in the day. So I'm going to let that play out. Hopefully this was useful. I mean, for Paragon, I think a lot of people know that Gladiator is obviously a nice one to go in within Vaults. I've got Cheat Death to give me that extra survivability when I do die. So you've got Borrowed Time and Cheat Death. And then you've got Uncontrollable, just to stop you from getting that from, complete loss of control. And then the other 3 I've got are To the Victor, Grizzled Veteran, and Overpower. They seem to work quite nicely together, as long as you get a kill in for 2 of these. For the legendary skill, I've gone with Roaring Strike, just to get that knockback, just an additional annoyance to the enemy, which works now with this Paragon. So that is my Necromancer Crowd Control build that I like to go in with for Shadow Vaults. Try it out. Let me know what you think in the comment section. If it works for you. You can also go in with a full-on damage battleground PvP heavy build, but I like going in with this, especially as when you're fighting in the balcony or the boss room. It's quite a closed area, so throwing out a lot of these skills in that small area is really, really annoying, especially when you're throwing it out in a group of enemies that come rushing at you. So hopefully you found this useful. I thought I'd just get it out there, and hope you enjoyed watching. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye.
Not my time, it seems. Not yet. No, not yet. renewed. My life fades.